Most people will never understand what it costs to walk away from a parent. Not the decision itself, not the silence that follows, not the way you rehearse justifications in your head, even years later, even when you know, somewhere deep down, that you made the right choice. If you've ever quietly wondered why you feel this way, why something that should feel like freedom still carries so much weight, this video is for you. And if you've ever been told you're selfish, cold, or broken for choosing distance over dysfunction, I want you to stay with me. Because what psychology actually reveals about people who make this choice is the opposite of what the world tells you. What if I told you that cutting off a parent isn't a sign of damage, but one of the most psychologically sophisticated things a human being can do? Let's talk about it. The first thing you need to understand is this. The decision to step back from a parent doesn't usually happen suddenly. It doesn't come from anger alone. It doesn't come from being spoiled or ungrateful or unable to handle difficulty. Research in developmental psychology tells us that estrangement from a parent is almost always the last stop on a very long road. A road most people walked quietly, privately, and for years. Think about the child who kept trying, who kept showing up, who kept adjusting, shrinking, apologizing, hoping. Think about how many times that person went back to the well expecting water and came home thirsty. Estrangement, in most cases, isn't the beginning of giving up. It's the end of giving everything and receiving nothing. So here is the first psychological insight I want you to sit with. People who cut off a parent often have an extraordinarily high capacity for self-reflection, higher than most. This sounds simple, but it's actually rare. The majority of people find it easier to stay loyal to a narrative. Family is family. They did their best. It'll get better. Than to look clearly at what is actually happening to them. To override years of conditioning that told you your needs come last, to look your own pain in the eyes without flinching, requires a kind of emotional courage that psychologists call differentiation of self. It means you've separated your identity from the system you were born into. You've stopped defining yourself through your role in someone else's story. That is not coldness. That is one of the hardest forms of psychological growth a person can achieve. And yet, you probably didn't feel brave when you made the decision, did you? You felt guilt. Maybe you still do. That guilt is the second insight, and it's important. People who were raised in emotionally difficult households are often wired, literally wired, neurologically, to feel responsible for the emotional states of the people who raised them. Psychologists call this parentification or emotional enmeshment. It's when a child is made to carry emotional weight that belongs to an adult. When you grow up in that environment, guilt doesn't mean you did something wrong. Guilt means you stopped performing a role you were assigned before you were old enough to consent to it. Here's a way to think about this. Imagine someone handed you a job the day you were born. No interview, no contract. The job was, keep this person emotionally stable. Make them feel loved. Don't need too much. Be small enough not to be a burden. And then, one day, you resigned. The guilt you feel isn't proof that you were wrong to leave. It's proof of how long you showed up for a job that was never yours to begin with. That guilt is not your conscience speaking. That guilt is conditioning. And recognizing the difference between the two, that is a level of self-awareness most people never reach. The third insight is one of the loneliest parts of this experience, and I want to name it clearly. People who distance themselves from a parent often feel profoundly misunderstood by everyone around them. Friends who had warm childhoods don't quite get it. Extended family may take sides. Culture, religion, and social norms all press in the same direction. Reconcile, forgive, keep the peace. And so many people who have made this choice learn to become incredibly private. They stop explaining themselves. They carry the full complexity of what happened in silence, because simplifying it for others feels like a betrayal of their own truth. What psychology recognizes here is something beautiful hidden inside the pain. People who go through this develop an unusual depth of inner world. They become skilled at sitting with ambiguity. They understand that love and harm can live in the same person. They know that forgiveness doesn't require proximity. These are not the thoughts of someone who is cold or unfeeling. These are the thoughts of someone who has done profound emotional work, often entirely alone, and come out the other side more nuanced, more compassionate, and more honest than the world gave them credit for. You learned to carry complexity. That's not a wound, that's wisdom. The fourth insight is about identity, and this one might surprise you. When the person who was supposed to be your mirror, your first reflection of who you are, wasn't safe, you had to build your identity from the inside out. You couldn't rely on a stable, loving reflection to tell you that you were enough, that you were good, that you mattered. You had to find that somewhere else, in yourself, in books, in music, in chosen friends, in quiet moments of solitude where you slowly, carefully, constructed a sense of self that didn't depend on anyone's approval. Attachment research tells us that securely attached people build their identity through connection. But people who didn't have that security, they often build something different, something self-authored. Psychologists have found that individuals who come from difficult attachment histories and do the work of healing often develop what's called an earned secure attachment, a security they created themselves through reflection and choice rather than one they inherited. It's harder, it takes longer, but it belongs entirely to you. No one can take it back because no one gave it to you. You built it. And the fifth insight, this is the one I want you to really hear. Choosing distance from a parent is, at its core, an act of profound love. Not hatred, not indifference. Love. Love for the person you are still becoming. Love for the children you might raise one day, who you refuse to pass the wound to. Love for the version of yourself that never got to be a child in safety. The one you are, even now, still learning to protect. Psychologists who study intergenerational trauma talk about something called the cycle break. The moment in a family line, sometimes spanning generations, where one person says, "Not anymore. Not with me." The cycle break is not dramatic. It doesn't always look heroic from the outside. Sometimes it just looks like a person sitting quietly in their apartment, not answering a phone call, choosing themselves for the first time. But that quiet moment? That is one of the most powerful things a human being can do. You are not the end of a broken line. You are the beginning of a different one. I want to offer you a reframe now, one that I hope changes something for you. The world tends to frame this as a story of loss, a family that failed, a relationship that ended, a child who couldn't forgive. But that is not the full picture. The full picture is of a person who loved enough to keep trying long past the point most would have stopped, who finally loved themselves enough to stop, who carries grief not because they feel nothing, but because they feel everything, including the grief for the parent they deserved and never had. That grief is not a sign of damage. That grief is the proof of your depth. You are not someone who gave up on family. You are someone who refused to give up on yourself. Those are two completely different things. And the fact that you've spent any time at all wondering if you made the right choice, the fact that you still think about it, still feel it, tells me everything I need to know about the kind of person you are. You are not cold. You are not unforgiving. You are someone who cares so much that the decision cost you something real, and you made it anyway. That's not something everyone can do. That's something rare. Take a breath. You are allowed to be at peace with where you are. You are allowed to stop defending your choices to people who were not there. You are allowed to build a life that feels safe, honest, and free. And you are allowed to do all of that while still being a good person. Actually, especially while being a good person. Your story doesn't make you broken. It makes you someone who knows exactly how much the human heart can carry and exactly what it needs to finally put some of that weight down. If this video reached something in you that you haven't had words for, please subscribe. Every week on this channel, we go deep into the psychology of how we think, how we heal, and why the most misunderstood parts of who we are often the most extraordinary. There are people here who will understand you, and that is exactly the kind of place you deserve to be.